This is Al Fritsch at earthhealing.info. We're going to talk today about Old Washington, a living relic. That's Washington, Kentucky. It's within a mile of where I was born and raised, and it is a good part of my own life, but it goes far deeper. It is a village that still exists in much the same way as it did in the 1790s when it was started, really, 1786, by Arthur Fox, who was a veteran of the Revolutionary War. And it was a place where Revolutionary War veterans actually came and had their estates in the area. In fact, the farm on which I was born on was part of the Henry Lee, General Henry Lee's place. And 17 such veterans are buried there in the Washington Cemetery. But it's the relic is that the buildings that were of that time and the flagstone sidewalks, these are still there. And in fact, you could even see some of the remnants of the first water wells that were put into the town, and it had its own waterworks. It was the second largest town in Kentucky at the first census of 1790, and it had 462 people at that time. And when I grew up, that's about the number it had then too. It was a town that really never grew, but it did have famous people that came from it. Some of those, one of the most interesting episode is that of that had two generals of the Civil War, but on opposite sides. Albert Sidney Johnston was one of the five full generals of the Confederacy, and he actually lived in the same house that later on became the home of the Nelsons. William Bull Nelson was a Union general who they don't think an awful lot of because he had a lot to do with the Battle of Richmond, Kentucky, where the Union lost more people through surrender than in any other battle in the whole Civil War. So Nelson is not really as highly regarded as Albert Sidney Johnson, who was the general in charge of the Confederacy in the Great Battle of Shiloh in Tennessee, and was killed during the middle of that battle. But these two are just some of the people that came from Washington. We have a relationship to the black race very much in Washington. Not that it had large numbers of people, but one of those was being sold in the 1830s, and it was witnessed by Harriet Beecher Stowe, who President Lincoln said was the little miss that started the Civil War because of her Uncle Tom's Cabin. And so Uncle Tom was sold there in Washington, and she observed it while visiting one of her students' homes. And and that became an impression upon her, which lasted all her life and caused part of the writing of that book. The others have come from there who are quite famous in their own right, but really the buildings themselves are what makes the relic. The land was originally Simon Kenton's, who was a famous pioneer of early West, and he sold it to Fox and William Wood, and they parsed it out into a town which looks essentially like it does today. And we see many of the old buildings that are there as you drive through. This isn't a walking tour, but there are good ones that can be presented if you come. You will see a lot of buildings that are actually log cabins. There is one that is made from a flatboat that was brought down the Ohio River and then placed as a home. The wood was from the flatboat itself, and that can be seen there in the town. The house that is more famous, probably, is that of Thomas Marshall, which is right outside of Washington upon the bluff of a hill. And Thomas Marshall was a brother of John Marshall the Supreme Court justice, one of our earliest ones, and his father, their father and mother also came and lived there until their death. And so these people were some of the famous early pioneers of Washington. There were famous people who came through because Washington is really on the old Buffalo Trace, going from Limestone, which then became Maysville, Kentucky, at the Ohio River, where there is a forge and where the ford where the buffaloes would cross, and goes all the way in towards Lexington, Kentucky. And this is a famous stretch of highway which got vetoed, by the way, and which the main street of Washington was part of, and that was by the Maysville Road build in 1830, and that was vetoed by Andrew Jackson, saying that it was intrastate, even though it was a part of an extension of a road that went all the way from up in Ohio down to Florence, Alabama. And but still, he disliked Henry Clay from Kentucky, and therefore he thought that was too much support for the Kentucky people, and vetoed that bill, which really cost that area more than anything else, because it never became as famous as other parts, including Cincinnati and Louisville, losing a lot of its prominence at that moment. Among the people who did come through, many presidents actually found their way through Washington, including Zach Taylor, the 12th president, who actually was a military recruiter before he became sort of famous in the different wars, the War of Mexican-American War, and then died somewhat after that as president. Among the other establishments that can be seen there, this town had the first post office west of the Alleghenies. It served the entire Northwest Territory at one time. It also had the first bank west of the Alleghenies. And so these are actually log cabins today serving the people, though they're not the same one as that was at that time. It still is an authentic log cabin that was there at that time. And so we have to face the fact that some of this has been moved to where there's museums now, 5 or 6 in the town, but at the same time, it's still lived in for the greater part. And we want you to come and see it because that's what makes it living. It's a relic from our past, which is a very historic one, but it's also one where people live and grow flowers and have a nice place that can be seen as they walk their dogs. And we will actually see that this Washington has lived and is living today and has a great promise for the future. Come and see it. This is Al Fritz from earthhealing.info.